The procedure for denouncing the fundamental documents of the CIS and thus for Moldova's final withdrawal from the organization was initiated by the Moldovan Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They stated that Russia had violated the core principles of the Commonwealth. In addition, this step is part of Moldova's course toward European integration. Now the decision must be approved by the country's parliament.
Leaving the statutory bodies of the CIS will allow the state budget to save 3.1 million lei annually. This amount represents the membership fee. At the same time, the free movement of citizens of the Republic of Moldova in CIS countries will not be affected, since it is largely regulated by existing bilateral agreements. The denunciation of the founding treaties will not affect CIS agreements that bring economic benefits to the country. This is according to a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Moldova on the agency's website.
Experts note that this decision has become part of Moldova's strategy to gradually move away from political and economic pressure from the Kremlin and to accelerate its course toward European integration.
Moldova never felt comfortable in the CIS because the CIS existed for Russia's benefit, for Russia to control the Republic of Moldova and the other former Soviet republics that were then part of the CIS. Even though we were members of the CIS, Russia closed its market to our wine, fruit, vegetables, and various Moldovan products. That is why the Republic of Moldova has long set its course toward the West, toward joining the European Union. And it is impossible to sit on two chairs, to be in two boats and sail both toward Siberia and toward Brussels.
Moldova's exit from the CIS demonstrates a loss of trust in Russia and at the same time confirms the country's desire to move toward the European Union. This is how Brussels reacted to Chișinău's decision. We
note that after Russia's full-scale aggressive war against Ukraine, Moldova began to withdraw from this structure, and in fact it has ceased its participation. Moldova did this in order to align with the European Union's common foreign and security policy, which is undoubtedly a very good step and the right choice for the Moldovan people because Russia cannot be relied upon. That is why we will continue to support Moldova in all its efforts on the path to Europe.
According to experts, the weakening of Russian influence in the region is also evidenced by the Moldovan parliamentary elections, which took place in September 2025. At that time, despite attempts to expand its propaganda through corruption, disinformation, and cyber attacks, Russia failed. According to analysts, this indicates that the majority of Moldovan citizens have sent a clear signal in support of the course toward EU integration. On March 10th, the leaders of Moldova and Lithuania met in Vilnius to discuss issues of European integration. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda stated that he welcomes the progress in implementing reforms achieved by the Moldovan government.
We welcome the progress in implementing reforms achieved by Moldova despite difficult circumstances. We urge Moldova to continue and accelerate the necessary reforms related to the European Union, to make them irreversible, and to ensure their benefits are tangible and clear to society. Gitanas Nausėda, President of Lithuania.
According to Nausėda, Moldova's membership in the European Union, like Ukraine's, is a strategic goal for Lithuania by 2030. The president expressed hope that this process could be accelerated. Moldova's position regarding Ukraine remains unchanged. After another Russian attack on Ukraine, Moldovan President Maia Sandu called on the international community not to divert attention from the Ukrainian state. Russian strikes on Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure are war crimes. Moldova unequivocally condemns them. The international community must focus on Ukraine. Now is not the time to retreat. Maia Sandu, President of the Republic of Moldova, on the social network X. It was the war in Ukraine that made the Moldovan government realize that the Russian Federation cannot be trusted, experts note. The threat from Russia prompted Chișinău to take countermeasures.
The events that took place in Ukraine awakened our politicians. They reviewed all documents related to security. Now we are establishing an institute whose goal is to fight, to wage war against this hybrid war from Russia. The people of the Republic of Moldova and the political forces of the Republic of Moldova now realize that we must stand with Ukraine, stand with the West.
Analysts note that if Russia somehow manages to gain power, Moldova could become a staging ground for a hybrid war against the EU. Moscow will also strengthen its military presence, creating an additional threat to Ukraine. Moldova's accession to the European Union, on the other hand, will ensure peaceful cooperation and strengthen Europe with another country.
Ion Taburza, political analyst and executive director of the NATO Information and Documentation Center in the Republic of Moldova, is now joining us live. Ion, hello.
Hello.
Ion, let's remind our viewers so they have a broader understanding, maybe some have already forgotten. What exactly is this Commonwealth? What is the CIS organization? What could it offer Moldova? What was actually beneficial for Moldova in this cooperation? Let me just remind you in simple terms. This is a regional international organization that was established in 1991 to ensure a civilized separation of the former Soviet republics. Civilization did not happen because, as far as I remember, both with Ukraine and with Moldova, the Russian Federation always had certain conditions, bargaining and so on, including threats, economic ones as well. So what did the CIS give to Moldova?
The CIS didn't really give anything to the Republic of Moldova. It was more out of habit. In the first years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and out of habit from the former leaders of the former Soviet republics, they continued by inertia, you could say. They communicated with each other. The CIS was a very suitable platform for this, for them to meet and for them to have the illusion that they were still together. On paper, the Commonwealth of Independent States was originally supposed to be a formal international organization that would later serve as a comprehensive common platform for various complex integration processes, especially those focused on economic cooperation and development. But it never got to that point because the government of the Russian Federation almost immediately began to see the CIS and fully comprehend the nature of this new structure as a distinct and exclusive sphere of its own strategic geopolitical interests and ambitions. It can be argued and indeed said that it was precisely because of the actions of the Russian Federation that those complex integration processes, which the political leaders of the former Soviet republics, or already the leaders of the newly independent states, had initially hoped for and relied on, ultimately failed to materialize and never actually came to fruition as intended. We remember how about 10 to 15 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, President Lukashenko accused the Russian Federation, saying that it was precisely because of Russia that these integration processes were moving forward and becoming more complicated. Because the Russian Federation uses various economic levers, energy levers to put pressure on the post-Soviet countries. And you could say that the CIS was more of a geopolitical concept for the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation even came up with a special term for it, the near abroad. But this is an amorphous structure that never really worked, and the relationships between the countries were based precisely on bilateral ties. When focusing specifically on bilateral relations, we prioritize formal bilateral agreements and not broad multilateral agreements.
How much time might it take for the Republic of Moldova to fully withdraw from the CIS, considering Ukraine's experience, given that Ukraine neither signed nor ratified the CIS charter? In other words, it was never really a full member of the CIS. It only had the status of a founding state. So if we look at our history in this sense, in its entirety, Ukraine completed its withdrawal from the CIS only in 2018. And that was practically without ever fully joining this post-Soviet organization. How much time do you think it might take Moldova to do the same? And what is the main message behind these withdrawals? The initiation of this withdrawal in Moscow.
Here, it's important to clarify that the Republic of Moldova began this process 2 years ago. It was precisely 2 years ago from today, back in 2023, when we officially annulled and terminated the various standing agreements within the framework of the Commonwealth of Independent States. And legally speaking, the governing authorities are explicitly stating and maintaining that all of these agreements now need to be annulled in their entirety. Officially finalizing the separation will take about another 6 months, maybe a little longer. Now we have reached the point where we are annulling or withdrawing from the fundamental acts that establish the Commonwealth of Independent States, because the Republic of Moldova, if I remember correctly, signed about 180 agreements within the framework of the Commonwealth of Independent States. And we have annulled and withdrawn from, I believe, about 2/3 of all these documents, because this process has been ongoing for the past 2 years. And now we are practically on the threshold of a complete exit. Perhaps there will still be some agreements remaining within the Commonwealth of Independent States and this structure, but they will not be of such significant importance. And those that were already in existence had absolutely no tangible or practical effect whatsoever. And the message is highly probable to be primarily symbolic, because it is symbolic specifically for the Russian Federation, because we have reached the point where we have practically begun the process of joining another organization, namely the European Union. And it is precisely now that we are withdrawing from the fundamental treaties of the CIS, because we need to begin an official political agreement for association with the European Union or accession to the European Union. Right now, we are also at the technical level, but we have practically already started negotiations. Then as we join the European Union, of course, we will be leaving the Commonwealth of Independent States. This is a very good, clear signal to the Russian Federation, because the Republic of Moldova does not intend to enter the geopolitical space of the Russian Federation. And in fact, we want to build a European state, but we have a different path of development. It is precisely that we want and must join the European Union. Of course, we have the same intentions as Ukraine. And these post-Soviet countries together must separate from the space that the Russian Federation is trying to control, to bring under its control. We all see what disastrous, tragic consequences this leads to. These particularities have turned out disastrously for these countries, of course. We are talking specifically about Ukraine, where the Russian Federation sees these countries as its own geopolitical sphere of influence.
And of course, resources, possibly for future, more global wars. It should be noted, so that our viewers don't get the wrong impression, that the conditions for joining the EU do not require leaving other organizations such as the CIS. No, that's not the case. There is absolutely no formal legal requirement. But the fact that the path...
Yes, of course. But in this way, we are sending a very clear signal to the Russian Federation that we have chosen a different path of development, and in fact we want to build a different model of the state, not according to the Russian Federation's model.
And why is that? Because the Russian Federation itself created such conditions, including political ones. Let's discuss how Moldova is living today after the parliamentary elections in Moldova in 2025. In fact, they indicate a weakening of Russian influence in the region. And this was previously stated by the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation of the Press Service of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Andriy Kovalenko, after his analysis. And he noted that Russia has lost Moldova just as it lost Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Baltic countries, and Ukraine. This is despite the fact, of course, that to this day, the Russian Federation continues to interfere in elections in places like Hungary, let's recall Romania, and so on. What is the situation in Moldova today, considering if we take the experience? Let's say, for example, your neighboring country, Romania. There, disinformation was actively spread, and this also influenced people's choices.
Yes, Romania has its own specifics. There, a wave was deliberately created, a kind of nostalgic wave for the communist period, for Ceausescu. They started talking about the nation state Romania, not as it is now, not as part of the European Union. And the Russian Federation, through its channels and social networks, managed to play on emotions and create such a phenomenon. Kalina Gorgievsky, then George Simeon. But the state institutions of Romania managed to withstand it. And this, of course, was also a defeat for the Russian Federation. As for the Republic of Moldova, yes, of course, after the elections, we are experiencing a certain lull. We can see how The Russian Federation is trying to recalibrate its approach to the Republic of Moldova. We are under no illusions that Russia has left Moldova alone and that we will now calmly integrate into the European Union. Most likely, the Russian Federation has now taken a pause to reflect in order to come up with or develop a new strategy for the Republic of Moldova. And this year, we can say from the point of view of politics, it is an apolitical year because we have no elections at all. Usually every year we have certain elections. First local elections, then presidential, and finally parliamentary. This year we have no elections at all, and that's probably why there is a certain calm. But next year we will have local elections, and of course we will see movement from the Russian Federation, which will try to influence the outcome or the way these elections are conducted and their results. Now, there is more talk about Transnistria, about the fate of Transnistria, and specifically through Transnistria. Russian political parties and actors in the Republic of Moldova are trying to influence society specifically through Transnistria. Specifically that the Republic of Moldova must necessarily integrate Transnistria. We cannot start negotiations without it. In this way, they are trying through Transnistria to influence the process of the Republic of Moldova's integration into the European Union. Because in this way, they are trying to gain leverage so that Transnistria becomes the obstacle without which the Republic of Moldova will not be able to integrate into the European Union. But beginning in the upcoming year, once again, it is highly probable that the Russian Federation will try to significantly intensify their strategic pressure and influence on the Republic of Moldova.